The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of the county courthouse, casting long shadows across the worn wooden benches. The usual buzz of whispered conversations and shuffling papers filled the air, but today was different. Today, everyone's attention was fixed on an unusually small figure standing before Judge Wilson's bench, a 10-year-old boy who barely reached the height of the defendant's table. The boy stood there in his freshly pressed clothes, clearly too big for his small frame, probably borrowed from an older cousin. His hands fidgeted with the hem of his oversized dress shirt as he waited for the proceedings to begin. The courtroom was packed, unusual for a juvenile case, but word had spread quickly about this particular hearing. Officer Thompson, who had brought the case forward, sat in the front row, his expression a mix of duty and unexpected sympathy. He had found the boy 3 nights ago, huddled behind the local grocery store, clutching a loaf of bread and some milk. The security cameras had caught him sneaking out through the back door after closing time. The judge looked down at the file before him, then at the small boy. In his 30 years on the bench, he had seen countless juveniles stand before him, but something about this case touched a nerve he thought had long since hardened. The boy's file told a story that was becoming all too familiar in their small town: a single parent working multiple jobs, an empty refrigerator, and a child forced to grow up too fast. As the proceedings began, the court-appointed guardian stood beside the boy, placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder. The charges were read out: breaking and entering, petty theft. In adult court, these would be minor offenses, but seeing them attached to a child who should have been worried about homework and playground games made them feel somehow heavier. The evidence was straightforward. The security footage clearly showed the boy's careful planning, how he had watched the store's closing routine for days, how he had found the faulty back door, and how he had taken only what his family needed most. There was no vandalism, no damage, just a desperate attempt to fill empty stomachs. The courtroom remained silent as Judge Wilson began to speak, his voice carrying the weight of authority tempered with something else, a grandfatherly concern that wasn't usually present in his proceedings. He asked the boy if he understood why he was there, why what he did was wrong, and if he had anything to say before the court decided his fate. What happened next would stay with everyone present for years to come. The boy stepped forward, his small shoulders straightening as he gathered his courage. His voice, when it came, was clear and steady, carrying to every corner of the hushed courtroom. Nobody could have predicted the words that would follow, words that would change not just his fate, but the entire community's perspective on justice, compassion, and the true meaning of right and wrong. The truth that would emerge from this child's simple explanation would force everyone present to confront their own assumptions about justice and mercy, about need and desperation, about what it truly means to do the right thing in a world that sometimes makes it impossible to follow all the rules. The boy's words came slowly at first, but with growing confidence as he spoke. "Your Honor," he began, his small voice steady despite the tears threatening to spill from his eyes, "I know stealing is wrong. My mom taught me that. She works so hard, 3 jobs now, but last week, my little sister got sick." A ripple of murmurs swept through the courtroom. The judge leaned forward slightly, his stern expression softening almost imperceptibly. The boy continued, his words painting a picture that made every adult in the room shift uncomfortably in their seats. "Mom had to stay home with her for 2 days because she was burning up with fever. That meant no pay." He paused, swallowing hard. "The medicine cost all the money we had left. By Sunday, there was nothing left to eat. Nothing." His voice cracked on the last word, but he stood straight, his dignity intact despite his circumstances. The court-appointed guardian beside him placed a gentle hand on his shoulder, but the boy wasn't finished. What he said next left the entire courtroom in stunned silence. "I tried everything else first, Your Honor. I swear I did. I mowed Mrs. Chen's lawn next door, but she's on a fixed income too and could only give me $5. I collected cans for recycling until my hands were dirty and cut up." He held up his small hands, and sure enough, there were traces of healing cuts across his palms. Officer Thompson, still seated in the front row, found himself looking down at his own hands, remembering similar cuts from his childhood when times had been tough. "When I heard my sister crying because she was hungry, The boy's voice wavered for the first time. "I remembered seeing the store manager throw away good food sometimes. I thought maybe there would be something in the back we could eat. I didn't mean to steal from the shelves, but when I got in and saw all that food." The judge's eyes narrowed, not in anger but in concentration. "And why did you take only bread and milk? The security footage shows you passed by the candy and snacks." The boy's answer came with a simple logic that only a child could deliver, "Because Mom always says we need to make healthy choices, even when things are hard. Bread fills you up, and milk helps you grow strong. I needed my sister to stay strong." The prosecutor, who had been standing ready with his arguments, found himself slowly sinking back into his chair. The boy's words had stripped away the legal terminology, the courthouse procedures, leaving only the raw truth of human struggle and responsibility. A tissue appeared from somewhere in the gallery and was passed forward. The court clerk dabbed at her eyes, trying to maintain her professional composure. Even the usually stoic bailiff found himself looking out the window, blinking rapidly. But it was what the boy said next that truly transformed the atmosphere in the courtroom. His words weren't just about hunger or poverty or desperation. They revealed a truth about community, responsibility, and the complex web of human relationships that bound their small town together. As he continued speaking, it became clear to everyone present that this case was about far more than a simple act of theft. The boy's next words echoed through the hushed courtroom, touching something deep within everyone present. "Your Honor, my teacher always says that a community is like a big family. We're supposed to help each other. But..." He paused, wiping his nose with his sleeve. "I didn't know how to ask for help. Mom always tells us to be proud, to stand on our own feet." Judge Wilson removed his glasses, cleaning them slowly with his handkerchief, a gesture that his regular courtroom attendees knew meant he was deeply moved. The boy's words had struck a chord that resonated with a truth many had forgotten. "Last month," the boy continued, "when old Mr. Baker couldn't shovel his driveway because of his bad back, 5 neighbors showed up to help. When the Thompsons' house caught fire last summer, everyone donated clothes and furniture. But somehow..." His voice grew quieter, but in the silent courtroom, every word was crystal clear. "Somehow, it's harder to ask for food when your stomach is empty." The store owner, who had been sitting quietly in the back of the courtroom, stood up slowly. He cleared his throat, drawing all eyes to him. "Your Honor, if I may speak." The judge nodded, and the store owner stepped forward, his work-worn hands clasped in front of him. "I've been running that store for 27 years, he began, his voice gruff with emotion. "I've caught shoplifters before, but never." He looked at the boy, then back at the judge. "Never have I seen someone leave money on the counter. Even if it was only $5 for goods worth 20. A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom. This detail hadn't been mentioned before. The boy shuffled his feet, looking down at his worn sneakers. "It was all I had," he whispered. "I knew it wasn't enough, but I thought, maybe it would make it less wrong." The judge leaned forward, his interest piqued. "You left money? Why didn't you use it to buy something smaller?" The boy's answer was simple but profound, "Because my sister needed both. The bread would keep us full, and she needed the milk to take her medicine. Mom always says halfway doing something right is still doing it wrong. I couldn't choose between them, so I took both and left everything I had." Officer Thompson stood up next, adding his voice to the proceedings. "Your Honor, there's something else you should know. When we found him behind the store, he was dividing the bread into 4 pieces. He told us one was for his mom, one for his sister, one for the elderly lady next door who's on food stamps, and one for himself. The courtroom fell silent again as the full impact of these words sank in. Here was a child who, even in his desperation, thought of others. The judge's eyes moved from the boy to the filled courtroom benches, where he noticed several community leaders shifting uncomfortably in their seats. The boy's story was holding up a mirror to their community, revealing both its strengths and its failures. In trying to solve his family's crisis, he had inadvertently exposed a deeper problem that many had chosen to ignore. The simple act of a child attempting to feed his family had become a powerful catalyst for change, though none of them yet knew exactly what form that change would take. The judge sat back in his chair, his fingers forming a steeple under his chin as he considered all he had heard. The morning sun had shifted, and now the courtroom was bathed in a warm glow that seemed to soften the harsh lines of justice. Before he could speak, however, another voice called out from the back of the courtroom. "Your Honor, please, may I speak?" A woman in a nurse's uniform stood up, still wearing her badge from the local hospital. The judge nodded, and she made her way forward, her shoes making soft clicking sounds on the wooden floor. "I was working in the emergency room last week when this boy's sister was brought in. Their mother." She paused, composing herself. Their mother had walked 3 miles carrying her sick child because they couldn't afford the ambulance. The boy's shoulders tensed at the mention of that night, and his guardian placed a steadying hand on his back. The nurse continued, "I've been in healthcare for 20 years, and I've never seen someone so determined to hide their struggle." The mother kept apologizing for not having insurance, offering to work cleaning shifts at the hospital to pay the bill. The store owner stood up again, this time without waiting for permission. "Your Honor, I'd like to withdraw the charges." His voice was firm, decided. "I can't in good conscience pursue this case. Not after what I've learned today." But the judge held up his hand. "While I appreciate your sentiment, sir, the law must still address the actions taken, regardless of the circumstances." He turned his attention back to the boy. "Young man, do you understand that even the noblest intentions don't justify breaking the law?" The boy's response showed wisdom beyond his years. "Yes, sir. Mom says that rules are like fence posts, they keep us safe and show us where the boundaries are. But..." He hesitated, gathering his thoughts. "Sometimes the fence posts are so far apart that people fall through the gaps." A murmur of agreement rippled through the courtroom. The city council member present found herself frantically taking notes, while the local food bank director's face showed a mix of shame and determination. They had all failed this family somehow, and by extension, their community. The judge leaned forward again, his voice gentler now. "Tell me, what do you think would be a fair consequence for your actions?" The boy straightened his shoulders, showing remarkable composure for someone so young. "I should pay back the store for what I took. Maybe I could sweep the parking lot or help stock shelves after school. And..." He paused, his young face serious, "maybe I could help other kids who are hungry find better ways to get help." His words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. The local newspaper reporter in attendance had long since stopped writing, too captivated by the unfolding story. This wasn't just about one boy's desperate act anymore, it had become a moment of reckoning for the entire community. The judge's next words would need to balance justice with mercy, law with compassion. But more than that, they would need to address the larger issues this case had brought to light. As he prepared to deliver his decision, the tension in the courtroom was palpable. Everyone present knew they were witnessing something extraordinary, a moment when justice might serve not just to punish, but to heal and transform. Judge Wilson's voice, when it finally came, filled the courtroom with measured authority. "In my years on this bench, I've learned that true justice isn't just about following the letter of the law. It's about understanding the heart of it." He removed his glasses again, this time letting them rest on the desk before him. "Young man," he continued, looking directly at the boy, "your actions were wrong, but your intentions show a character that many adults would do well to emulate. You took responsibility for your family when you saw no other way out. However, breaking the law cannot be the answer. The boy nodded solemnly, his small hands clasped tightly in front of him. The judge's next words surprised everyone present. I'm going to propose something unusual. Instead of standard juvenile detention or community service, I have a different sentence in mind. The courtroom held its collective breath. The judge continued, first, you will work at the grocery store for 2 hours every Saturday morning for the next 3 months, not as punishment, but to learn the value of honest work and to repay what was taken. The store owner nodded approvingly, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. But the judge wasn't finished. Second, you will help establish a new program at your school. Working with the guidance counselor, you'll create a confidential system for students to report when they or their classmates don't have enough to eat. No child in this community should ever have to choose between hunger and breaking the law. The boy's eyes widened slightly, and several members of the school board present exchanged meaningful glances. The judge pressed on, his voice growing more passionate. Third, and this is not just for you, young man, but for all of us here today. I'm ordering the creation of a community task force. We need representatives from the food bank, local businesses, schools, and social services to ensure we have safety nets in place. No more gaps in the fence posts, as you so wisely put it. The city council member was already pulling out her phone, typing rapidly. The food bank director sat up straighter, his expression determined. The judge's words were catalyzing something larger than a simple court case. But here's the most important part of your sentence, the judge continued, his voice softening. Every Thursday afternoon, you'll meet with a mentor, someone to help you channel this remarkable sense of responsibility you've shown in more constructive ways. Then, in a move that stunned the courtroom into absolute silence, the judge stood up. And I volunteer to be that mentor. Whispers erupted throughout the courtroom. In 3 decades, no one had ever seen Judge Wilson step down from his bench during a proceeding. Yet here he was, walking around to stand directly in front of the boy, no podium or desk between them. You see, the judge continued, now speaking not just to the boy but to the entire room, sometimes justice needs to do more than correct a wrong. Sometimes it needs to build something right. Your actions broke the law, but they've also broken open our hearts and shown us where we've failed as a community. The boy looked up at the judge, tears finally spilling over onto his cheeks, but these weren't tears of fear or shame anymore. They were tears of relief, of hope, of feeling, perhaps for the first time, that he and his family weren't alone in their struggle. The impact of Judge Wilson's words rippled through the courtroom like waves on a pond. The boy's guardian wiped away her own tears as she watched her young charge stand a little straighter, his shoulders no longer bowed by the weight of his family's struggles. But what happened next touched everyone's hearts even more deeply. A woman stood up from the back of the courtroom, her clothes worn but clean, her face bearing the tired lines of someone who had worked too hard for too long. It was the boy's mother. She had slipped in quietly during the proceedings, coming straight from her morning shift at the diner, still wearing her waitress uniform. Your Honor, her voice trembled but grew stronger with each word, I don't know what to say. I failed my children. I was too proud to ask for help, too ashamed to admit we were struggling. She took a shaky breath. I thought I had to handle everything alone. The judge's response was immediate and kind. Mrs. Chen from next door told us how you take care of her cat when she has doctor's appointments. Officer Thompson mentioned how you organize the neighborhood watch schedule despite working 3 jobs. The hospital nurse spoke about how you offered to work extra shifts to pay your daughter's medical bills. That's not failure, ma'am. That's extraordinary strength. The store owner stepped forward again, clearing his throat. I'd like to offer the boy's mother a job, he announced. Full-time, with benefits. We need a manager for our new store location, someone who understands both business and community. Someone with integrity. He looked at the boy's mother with respect. "Someone like you." The mother's hand flew to her mouth, tears streaming down her face. The boy ran to her, wrapping his arms around her waist. The courtroom erupted in applause, but the judge wasn't finished yet. "This is exactly what I hoped to see," he said, his voice cutting through the noise. "Real justice isn't just about punishing wrongs, it's about making things right. But it doesn't stop here." He turned to address the entire courtroom. "We need to ensure this isn't just a one-time feel-good story. We need systematic change." The local bank president stood up next. "Your Honor, our bank can offer financial literacy workshops for families. We can also set up a special emergency fund for community members in crisis." Other business owners began nodding, minds already working on ways they could contribute. The school superintendent raised her hand. "We can expand our breakfast and lunch programs. No questions asked, no paperwork required. Every child deserves to learn on a full stomach." As more people stood up to offer solutions, the boy tugged at the judge's robe. When Judge Wilson looked down, the boy whispered something that made the stern judge smile. Taking out his gavel, he handed it to the boy and lifted him onto his chair. "Would you like to tell them yourself?" the judge asked. The boy nodded, his small hands gripping the gavel with reverence. Standing in the judge's chair, holding the gavel with careful reverence, the boy looked out at the sea of faces before him. His voice, though young, carried the wisdom that often comes from facing life's hardest challenges. "My teacher says that sometimes the best way to help yourself is to help others," he began, his words clear and strong. "When I was hiding behind the store that night, I saw other people looking for food in the dumpster. There was an old man in a nice coat, the kind my mom says people wear to office jobs. He was so embarrassed he ran away when he saw me. There was a lady with a baby who cried when she found nothing but empty boxes." The courtroom fell silent again, absorbing the weight of his words. The boy continued, his grip on the gavel tightening slightly. Maybe we could turn the store's back room into a place where people could get food if they need it, no questions asked. Like a food library." The store owner's eyes widened at the innovative suggestion, and several business owners began writing in their notebooks. The boy wasn't finished. "And maybe we could have a wall where people could leave notes about what they need, and others could help them. Not just food, but everything. Like when Tommy in my class needed new shoes because his feet hurt, or when Mrs. Chen's heater broke last winter." The city council member stood up, her voice filled with emotion. "A community needs board. Simple but brilliant. We could set them up all over town, maybe even create an app for those too proud to be seen asking for help." The boy nodded enthusiastically. "And we could have a special section in the grocery store where people can buy extra food to help others. Mom always says that giving feels as good as receiving." He looked at his mother, who beamed with pride through her tears. The judge's law clerk raised her hand. "I could coordinate with local law schools to provide free legal clinics. Help people understand their rights, especially regarding housing and employment." A local chef stood next to her. "My restaurant throws away too much good food every night. We could organize a network of restaurants to distribute leftover food to families in need." The boy listened to each suggestion, his face bright with hope. Then he did something unexpected. He gently tapped the gavel, bringing the excited chatter to a halt. The sound echoed through the courtroom, but it didn't feel like an ending. Instead, it felt like the beginning of something new. "In my class," he said, his voice carrying the simple truth that adults often overlook, "when someone makes a mistake, we have to say sorry and then make it right. I'm sorry for stealing, but maybe this is how I can make it right, by helping everyone remember that we're all just people who sometimes need help." Judge Wilson smiled, placing a gentle hand on the boy's shoulder. "Out of the mouths of babes," he murmured, then addressed the courtroom. This young man has turned a simple case of theft into a lesson about community, compassion, and justice. But lessons mean nothing without action. The boy raised the gavel one more time, looking at the judge for permission. When the judge nodded, he brought it down with purpose. The sound that rang out wasn't just the crack of wood on wood, it was the sound of change beginning, of a community waking up to its own potential for goodness. In the days that followed that remarkable court session, the small town began to transform in ways no one could have predicted. The story of the boy who stole bread but gave his community a wake-up call spread rapidly, touching hearts and opening minds throughout the region. The grocery store's transformation happened first. The store owner, true to his word, hired the boy's mother as manager of the new location. But he didn't stop there. Within a week, he had cleared out the store's back room and, with help from local volunteers, converted it into what the boy had imagined, a dignified space where people could access food and basic necessities without shame. They called it the neighbor's pantry, and its first visitor was the man in the business coat whom the boy had seen that night. This time, instead of running away in embarrassment, he shared his story. He was a former accountant who had lost his job during company downsizing and was struggling to make ends meet while caring for his elderly parents. By the end of the week, he was helping organize the pantry's inventory system and had job interviews lined up through connections he made with other volunteers. The community needs board became a reality faster than anyone expected. Local carpenters built beautiful wooden boards that were installed in various neighborhoods. The first note posted read simply, "Need size 4 winter boots for my daughter." Within hours, 3 pairs appeared. Soon, the boards were filled with both needs and offers of help, can teach basic computer skills, have extra baby clothes, offering rides to medical appointments. At the boys' school, changes were even more dramatic. The principal, inspired by the court session, implemented what became known as the lunch buddy system. Students with extra food in their lunch boxes could share with those who had less, but in a way that felt like friendship rather than charity. The cafeteria started serving breakfast to any student who arrived early, no questions asked. The boy himself took his court-mandated Saturday morning shifts at the grocery store seriously, but they rarely felt like punishment. Instead, they became a time of learning and connection. He helped elderly customers reach high shelves, carried bags to cars, and somehow always seemed to know which families might need directing to the neighbor's pantry. Judge Wilson kept his promise about mentoring, but the sessions often turned into informal community meetings. The boy's simple wisdom continued to guide the town's transformation. When he mentioned that some kids felt embarrassed getting free lunch at school, the cafeteria implemented a new payment system where all students used the same type of card, whether their parents paid or not. The local newspaper ran a feature story about the changes, titled "Justice Served: How a Child's Actions Fed a Community's Soul." The reporter wrote about more than just the new programs and initiatives. She captured the subtle shifts in the town's atmosphere, how people made more eye contact now, how they asked, "How are you?" and actually waited for the answer, how the phrase, "I need help," was no longer whispered in shame but spoken with the expectation of support. 1 month after that fateful court session, the boy's sister had fully recovered from her illness. Their mother, now working 1 steady job instead of 3, had time to attend school events and help with homework. But perhaps the most significant change was in how the town's children began to view their community. They learned that justice wasn't just about rules and punishments, it was about taking care of each other. 6 months after that transformative day in court, the town gathered for a special ceremony in the community center. The same people who had been present in the courtroom that day were there, but the atmosphere couldn't have been more different. Instead of tension and uncertainty, there was a sense of celebration and accomplishment. The boy, now standing confidently at the podium with Judge Wilson beside him, looked out at the crowd. He was wearing a new sweater, one that actually fit him, and his face had the healthy glow of a child who no longer knew hunger. But more than his physical appearance, it was his demeanor that had changed. He carried himself with the quiet dignity of someone who had learned that past mistakes could pave the way for future triumphs. 6 months ago, Judge Wilson addressed the gathering, a desperate act by a brave young boy held up a mirror to our community. Today, we're here to share what we see in that mirror now. He gestured to the presentation boards around the room, each displaying statistics that told a remarkable story. The neighbor's pantry had served over 200 families. The community needs boards had facilitated more than 1,000 acts of assistance. School attendance was up, and for the first time in the district's history, not a single student had gone without lunch. But the numbers told only part of the story. The boy's mother stepped forward, now dressed in the confident attire of a successful business manager. "My son's actions that night were wrong," she began, her voice strong and clear, "but they led to something so right. Our family's story could have been one of shame and punishment. Instead, it became a story of redemption and community." The store owner shared how his business had actually improved since implementing the changes. "People shop with their hearts now," he explained. "They buy extra to contribute to the neighbor's pantry. They look out for sales that might help others. We're not just selling groceries anymore, we're feeding a community's spirit." Other towns had taken notice. Delegations from neighboring communities had visited to learn about their programs. The Boys' Food Library concept was being implemented in cities across the state. The Community Needs Boards had inspired a mobile app that was helping connect resources with needs throughout the region. But the most powerful moment came when the boy himself spoke. "My teacher asked us to write about what we want to be when we grow up," he said, pulling a paper from his pocket. "I wrote that I want to be like a fence post, someone who helps keep others safe and shows them where to go when they're lost." There wasn't a dry eye in the room. Judge Wilson placed his hand on the boy's shoulder, speaking to everyone present. "Sometimes the greatest justice comes not from punishing mistakes, but from learning from them. This young man's actions, though wrong, taught us all how to be better neighbors, better citizens, and better humans." The ceremony concluded with the unveiling of a new sign outside the community center. It read, "A community is like a big family, we help each other." Below these words was a simple drawing of fence posts, connected not by barriers but by helping hands. As people mingled afterward, sharing stories and making new connections, the boy and Judge Wilson sat together on a bench outside. "Do you know what the best part of all this is?" the judge asked. The boy shook his head. "It's that years from now, when someone asks how our community became so special, they'll tell the story of a brave young boy who reminded us what justice really means." The boy smiled, understanding now that his biggest mistake had become his greatest contribution to the community he loved.